How we doing today, everybody? It's Watch Display here. Thank you for joining me today for this video. Give me a check out at Instagram, Watch Display. And if you like my videos, please like and subscribe. It helps out a ton. So today, I figured I had a very popular video that was talking about how men can wear 36mm DateJust, and it's got tons and tons of comments. And I still hold to that. I can totally wear a 36mm DateJust or a 36mm watch. And I just thought it would be a great way to compare the difference between my Day-Date 40 and this DateJust two-tone 36mm on Jubilee. And this variant is my wife's, so I'm not going to be able to latch it down. I didn't want to take out all the links and do all that kind of stuff. I could obviously wear it if I wanted to. I think I've worn it 2 or 3 times, but I just thought it would be a good way to show you what it looks like on a 6.75 inch wrist. And keep in mind, everyone, this is completely a personal preference. If I say that I think that a 36mm watch looks awesome on any man, that doesn't mean that you have to wear a 36mm watch, or I think your watch looks too big. The beautiful thing about watches, they come in all different shapes and sizes, and different brands offer different thicknesses and thinnesses and all this different stuff, so we can get what we like. Just because I mentioned something does not mean that it's absolute or that I am knocking any of your opinions, because I respect all your opinions. I mean, I have this tiny little vintage, well, not tiny, but smaller compared to my other watches, vintage Cartier Tank Jumbo that actually wears really nicely for a vintage Cartier, but a lot of people wouldn't even think about wearing this, and it actually wears very, very classy. It kind of just depends on what type of attire you're used to. So let's put the Day-Date 40 on, and if you've watched my other review on this watch, this is actually measures in a little bit under 40mm in true size. It actually wears it actually measures to 39.5, I believe. And you can just see how perfect this watch wears. And I've mentioned on my other video, one of the reasons why this DateJust 40 wears so much better than the DateJust 2 is not only that they changed the proportions of the bezel and the lugs, but they actually took that weird end link out that they had on the Day-Date 2 that kind of arced it out, and now you can pull these links straight down. So that's a great advancement, in my opinion, for the overall wearability of this watch. You can see it's still super thin for even having the Day-Date complication, and having this kind of sloping fluted bezel that meets the crystal at the top, which is still elevated about a millimeter or 2. It's still a very thin watch overall for a complication. I'll give you one more check out on the wrist of that one. So keep in mind, this one wears smaller than the sizes suggest on my wrist, and my wrist is 6.75 inches. So that gives you a good idea. I still have a large amount of real estate on this side in terms of the lug to lug, and I also have a large amount on this side. So it is not sloping over my wrist in any way, shape, or form. Now, certain people will say that they think the Day-Date should always be a 36mm, and it's classic. I strongly suggest you to go try on the Day-Date 40. Especially if you tried on the Day-Date 2 and it was just too big for you, or you thought it just looked too huge and overall too gaudy or whatnot. I would highly recommend to try on the Day-Date 40. It's definitely more reserved than the Day-Date 2, and it wears a lot smaller than you think if you size the bracelet properly. So let's lay that one down sideways. And now this is I think it's one, I can't remember the reference on this one, but it's the previous DateJust. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this on my wrist. Okay, I can. So you can see, I mean, obviously the dial is smaller, but you can see that lug to lug, they're almost the same on lug to lug. You're just getting a little bit more from the 9 to 3, or you can even do it from the 2 to 7. All those circular movement or measurements that we get, it wears a little bit smaller. But overall, it's really not that different, because this DateJust 36 actually wears a little bit bigger than the vintage DateJust 36. The cases are a little bit more pronounced. The lugs are a little bit more bold. They're a little bit more of a chunky case. They actually are a little thicker than not the 1803s, but some of the 1803s, actually, the first ones had a kind of thicker case back, and they actually wear pretty thick. Gives a little bit more presence on the wrist. But same with the 180, I think it's 38 or 28. I can't remember the references. But the, I mean, this wears very similar. I mean, they're very similar, and you would think, oh, Day-Date 40 and 36, because this one wears probably closer to a 37, maybe a little larger. So let's just even average up to like a 38 millimeter watch because of the case, the more modern Rolex case. And this one wears smaller because the lugs themselves, you can see, it's hard to tell in the video, but the lugs are a little bit more sloped on the Day-Date. And on the video, you can't really tell. But if I were to measure these lugs, I would almost, the lugs look thinner on the Day-Date. But they're very close. I'm not saying there's a huge difference. And both of these watches are unpolished, by the way. So there's no way that these would be, changed from what they were originally. But you can kind of see how the lugs slope a little bit more on the Day-Date versus the DateJust. And it's actually, even this edge over here, if you really look at it, it kind of sticks out more past the bezel. Versus the Day-Date, the bezel actually kind of overhangs a little bit. So it's really the bezel that's making this look like it's a little larger. You can see the bezel's hanging over. Versus this one, the bezel's not hanging over at all. I mean, it is like barely on this one little bit. Actually, it's not at all, really. Just that one little area, but overall, it's not. So the case itself is a little larger on this one versus the bezel in terms of the proportions. And maybe I have not measured just the bezel. I measured more the case. Maybe the bezel on this one is 40 millimeters, and that's where they get that measurement at. But I've always got under that, around closer to 39 millimeters, 39 and a half when I measure this watch with two different sets of calibers. So it's not just one. I have a digital one and a manual set one. But you can just get a little good idea of how it wears. And we'll put the Day-Date on one more time just so you can get a flashback of how it wears. I mean, it's really not that different. Of course, it's more bold. It's solid gold. Of course, it's more... I do think the bezels on these are a little bit more crisp on these new Day-Dates. And the dials are definitely more pronounced, in my opinion, than the stick dials. So it does look a little different, like more bold, but it's a solid gold watch. I mean, if you look at the overall wrist presence, it's very similar. But thanks for checking this video out, and if you have any other recommendations for videos or you have any questions, I've had most of all these Day-Dates as well as the 36 millimeters, as well as the DateJust 41. I wish I had a DateJust 41 to actually compare to this Day-Date 40, because I bet that the Day-Date 40 would still wear smaller, because even though the DateJust 41 says 41, it's actually less than 40 on the true measurement. So I bet they were actually closer in terms of wearability. But of course, my pick is always the President bracelet. It's my favorite bracelet currently right now in Rolex lineup.